leading off the hour with Wisconsin representative and chairman of the Select Committee on Chinese Communist Party, Congressman Mike Gallagher. I'm supposed to have my special, my greeting for you there, Mike Gallagher, which is
There's no
Mike
failure in sports.
Gallagher. That's what I was looking for right there. That's your new intro. If we can try that one more time. Chairman Mike.
There's no failure in sports.
One more time, guys, just to get it right. Chairman Mike.
There's no failure in sports.
Gallagher. That's it. That's what we. So good morning, Chairman Mike. How are you?
It's always great to be with you, Hugh. You're so gracious with these intros.
Look, I just want people to know Wisconsin is different. You're very forgiving. And now we're going to turn to the Chinese Communist Party, and I hope you're as forgiving towards them. I had a dinner. I'm going to see you later today. I had a lunch last week with three smart people, one of whom is a foreign national, two of whom are Democrats, all three of whom agreed that China wasn't going to attack Taiwan. They would prefer to absorb it by osmosis and take many years, and they'll just buy the island like they did Hong Kong. And I thought to myself, boy, oh boy, the left doesn't want to deal with the reality of the Chi-Coms. How do you get through to people like this, that we could wake up any morning and see an invasion?
Well, let me start by paraphrasing what Churchill said at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, which is to say there's no doubt that the Soviet Union does not want war. They want the fruits of war and an unimpeded expansion of their power and ideological objectives. The same is true of Xi Jinping. No doubt he would prefer to absorb Taiwan via political warfare rather than actual warfare. Yet he repeatedly is telling us that he is prepared to use force if necessary to achieve his life's ambition. And what these people need to do is pay attention to what Xi Jinping says when he talks not to the Davos crowd, but when he talks to his own party membership. And on that point, he has been crystal clear that he is prepared to use force if necessary, particularly when, as I believe will happen, he realizes that achieving that objective of reunification of Taiwan with the mainland, cannot be achieved via political warfare because the DPP is going to win the election in Taiwan in January of 2024. So if Ukraine has taught us anything, it is that we should listen to dictators when they tell us in plain language what they intend to do. And if we ignore that, because we graft our own Western sensibilities onto Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping, and we do mirror imaging, we do so at our own peril. The risks of an invasion are increasing. The fact that the administration is now doubling down on an economic engagement strategy with China represents the triumph of delusion over bitter experience.
You're referring to Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, going to Vienna for 2 days of talks with Chinese counterparts, which was wildly celebrated, congratulatory. It's a little bit of Munich appeasement. It dressed up in the diplo speak of 2023. But, Chairman, I have just finished the book called The Sleepwalkers by Sir Christopher Clark. On the run-up, the years 1910 to 1914, I moved immediately into John Keegan's study of World War I because everything was miscalculation. Everything was a failure to pay attention to what the other sides were doing and to plot a worst-case scenario because they didn't want to think about a worst-case scenario, and they ended up with a worst-case scenario because no one spoke clearly. My colleague Dennis Prager likes to say clarity before agreement. No one speaks clearly. Xi speaks clearly. We just don't want to listen to him.
That's correct, Hugh. Let me be clear as well. Listen, I have no problem if we want to set up what's called a crisis communication channel. I think it makes a lot of sense so that, our generals can talk to their generals and there's no miscalculation that might lead to war. What I disagree with the administration on is this idea that economic engagement or cooperation on a discrete set of issues, usually they talk about climate change, or they talk about non-proliferation, or they talk about stability on the Korean Peninsula, that somehow, A, the Chinese Communist Party is going to be a productive collaborator on those issues, and B, that cooperation will reduce tension in the overall relationship. Because if you don't deal with the main thing, which is the CCP's expanding aggression, which is particularly focused on Taiwan right now. And as I've told you many times, in some meaningful sense, the invasion of Taiwan has already begun in cyberspace and in the information space. If you don't deal with that issue, and if you're not clear about that issue, then I'm not sure how the relationship improves. Moreover, we need to remember that we are not the aggressor in this relationship. It is the CCP which is upending the status quo across the Taiwan Strait. It is the CCP which flew a spy balloon over the continental United States. And despite that, and now we have reports that the State Department tried to de-emphasize that, tried to slow roll information on that, is still precluding Congress from getting a fulsome assessment of what happened so as not to endanger these bilateral meetings. I actually think that just makes us look weak. The CCP reads that as an invitation for more aggression. It's a paradox of Marxist-Leninist regimes that the more secure they are, the more aggressive they become.
The neo-appeasement that's in the water, and everyone takes that as an insult. I don't mean it as an insult. I mean it as a genuine ideology that dominated in the 30s from Stanley Baldwin through Neville Chamberlain, which is you can satisfy dictators. You can actually do a deal with a dictator that they will stick to. That's back, and it's deep. We saw Reagan beat it in the 80s with the deployment of the Pershings and the cruise missiles, but it's back, and the neo-appeasers don't want to deal with Xi. How is the committee going to get that to change? Will the Democrats on the committee be vital to that change?
Well, we're hoping to have our first set of policy recommendations out next week. We're working towards a strong set of recommendations that are focused on Taiwan, as well as a smaller set of strong recommendations that came out of our hearing on the ongoing Uyghur genocide, which leads to something that we're doing tomorrow night. We're having a hearing tomorrow night on the CCP's ongoing economic aggression globally and how we level the playing field. We have as witnesses Roger Robinson, who designed and was key to the implementation of Ronald Reagan's economic warfare strategy against the Soviet Union. We have Bob Lighthizer, who served as U.S. Trade Representative, and we have Eric Schmidt, who obviously was the head of Google and brings a private sector experience. And so we're hoping that hearing will then tee up our broader effort, which is the next phase of the committee's work, which is focused on selective economic decoupling and how we win this economic competition. Because a lot of the sentiment for engagement and appeasement comes from the private sector. It comes from Wall Street. It comes from K Street. It comes from Hollywood. It comes from Silicon Valley. And there's this naive belief that we can just go back to the status quo, ante, that somehow we can go back to the good old days and return to the responsible stakeholder hypothesis, or, the more theme parks we open up in China, the better behaved Xi Jinping will become. I disagree with that, but we need to have a conversation with the private sector and get them to understand that there is no such thing as a private business in China. Business does not exist solely for business sake. Business exists for the party's sake. You do business at Xi Jinping's, by the grace of Xi Jinping. He owns your business if it's in China. He could snap a finger and have access to any of your IP or any of your business operation.
So, last question, Chairman Gallagher. Is there any doubt in your mind that 1 million Uyghurs are in prison camps there? I want people to understand. I don't know how we normalize with a genocidal regime. Have they stopped the genocide?
No, but there's a lot of people trying to ignore it. I would direct your listeners to our committee's website, and we have just horrific testimony from survivors of the concentration camp, women who were subject to beating, forced sterilization. I mean, the stories are horrific. We've said never again for many, many decades now, and yet this is happening again. This isn't just Republican Mike Gallagher. It's two administrations, Democrat and Republican, that have said there's an ongoing genocide in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, and we ignore it at our own peril.
Well, then how do we do business with a genocidal regime? It's like we knew about the concentration camps prior to 1938, but we'd still do deal. It's as though we did. We didn't, but this time we do, right?
Yeah, it's the same theory that economic entanglement will somehow improve the relationship and produce peace. But now we have multiple decades of experience to suggest that doesn't work. Like, there's a logic to that approach. I get it. The only problem is it did not work. And so to double down on that hypothesis would be literal insanity. We should not do that. We need to be selectively decoupling in key areas.
Chairman Mike, there is no losing in sports. Gallagher, it is great to see you. I'll see you later today. Thank you for joining me as always.